a very serious situation here, and I can tell you one that is hard to believe with my own eyes.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most significant events in history that should have been headline news, but got overlooked due to other events that occurred around the same period.
The French capital's emergency services immediately announced Mr. El-Fayed and the driver had died, but it took them 2 hours to cut the princess out of the twisted wreckage.
Number 20. Black Saturday Bushfires, overshadowed by 2008 financial crisis. The Black Saturday bushfires, which ravaged Australia between February 7th and March 14th, 2009, are considered one of the worst natural disasters in the country's history.
Flames, lots of flames, trees on fire, 100 foot high, embers, branches falling, animals running for their life.
During this period, a series of around 400 bushfires were ignited in Victoria, Australia's most densely populated state. Despite its immense impact within Australia, the disaster received limited international media attention, largely because of the concurrent global financial crisis.
Fear spread in the month of September 2008 at a rate that was like a tsunami.
The worldwide economic turmoil, which began unfolding in early 2007, peaked in late 2008 and early 2009, leaving very few reporters and resources available to cover other events. Consequently, the Black Saturday bushfires, which claimed 173 lives and destroyed thousands of homes, remained largely underreported on the global stage.
I've never seen anything like it. It came out of the forest at 100 miles an hour, and it just took everything in its path.
Number 19. The Great Halifax Explosion, overshadowed by U.S. declaration of war on Austria-Hungary. On December 6, 1917, a French cargo ship carrying a vast amount of explosives collided with a Norwegian vessel at the Halifax harbor in Nova Scotia, Canada. The resulting blast devastated the city of Halifax, killing nearly 2,000 people and injuring thousands more.
It brought a city to its knees in an instant. 2 square kilometers of Halifax simply obliterated by the largest human-made explosion prior to Hiroshima.
In any other period, this would have been the top news story, but it flew under the radar as it happened during a critical juncture of World War I. The day after the disaster, the U.S. Congress and Senate passed a resolution declaring war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was signed by President Woodrow Wilson on the same day.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet, within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
This shifted global attention away from the tragedy, despite the significant human toll and immense destruction it caused in Halifax. Number 18. Soviet Union detains U.S. convoy, overshadowed by the day the music died. February 3, 1959 is often remembered as the day the music died because of the plane crash that killed musicians Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson.
The young pilot's lack of experience led him to lose control. He dipped too low, a wing hit the ground, and sent the plane tumbling across this field.
This tragic event was widely reported and has since been referenced in various songs and movies.
The day the music died.
Due to this immense coverage, it eclipsed another significant incident on the same day. In West Germany, amid Cold War tensions, 5 U.S. Army soldiers were detained by Soviet officers after they refused inspection of their trucks upon crossing from East Germany. This action, perceived by the U.S. as a provocation from the Soviet Union, likely would have been a major news story if not for the attention drawn by the plane crash. Number 17. Frank Sinatra's death, overshadowed by the Seinfeld finale.
We begin tonight with the death of an American original, Frank Sinatra. For the better part of this century, he set the standard for popular music in this country and around the world.
On the surface, Frank Sinatra and Seinfeld share no similarities, but in actuality, the two are linked in a rather heartbreaking way. On May 14, 1998, Seinfeld aired its highly anticipated series finale.
And how do you find with respect to the charge of criminal indifference?
We find the defendants guilty.
However, while around 76 million people gathered around their TVs to watch the show bow out, Sinatra suffered a massive heart attack at his Los Angeles residence and was rushed to the hospital. According to the fire chief, Sinatra's swift transportation was facilitated by the unusually empty streets, as millions were home tuning in to the finale. Even Sinatra's daughter Nancy missed the chance to spend his final moments with him, as she too was engrossed in the show. Tragically, despite medical efforts, the iconic crooner passed away at the hospital.
For millions of fans, his voice was the soundtrack for a lifetime of memories.
Number 16, 1989 Bay Bridge World Series, overshadowed by Loma Prieta earthquake.
The screech was so loud, and it felt like a train was coming through the door. I said, earthquake, and auxiliary lights flipped on, and I was gone.
While many of the entries on this list were overshadowed by events elsewhere, this one stands out for occurring in the same location. In 1989, the Bay Area of California was abuzz with baseball fever, as two of its local teams, the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants, made it to the World Series. However, just before Game 3 began on October 17th, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck California's central coast, causing widespread damage and claiming 63 lives.
It was like someone was making up a bed. I'm in a Bronco Ford, and it was tossed around up at least a foot off the pavement.
Although Candlestick Park, the stadium for the game, remained intact, the World Series was postponed for 10 days, with attention rightfully diverted to the aftermath of the Loma Prieta earthquake. The championship ultimately took a back seat in media coverage. Number 15, the Peshtigo Fire, overshadowed by the Great Chicago Fire.
There was a census the year prior, 1870, and there were 1,750 people in the populace of Peshtigo. They feel that 800 survived.
The Peshtigo Fire of 1871, which ravaged northeastern Wisconsin and parts of Michigan, takes its name from the city of Peshtigo, which was most heavily affected. Despite being the deadliest wildfire in recorded history, consuming over 1 million acres and claiming up to 2,500 lives, its significance was overshadowed by a similar calamity that befell a larger city. On the same day, Chicago suffered a devastating conflagration, resulting in significant damage and approximately 300 deaths.
When they saw how red the sky was, they said that it was Judgment Day.
Although both tragic events, one might assume that the Peshtigo fire, with its vastly higher death toll, would have garnered more media attention. However, as Peshtigo was far less developed than Chicago, its tragedy has largely been extinguished from historical accounts and public memory. Number 14, the death of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, overshadowed by Tiananmen Square massacre. On June 4, 1989, the Chinese government sent in troops who opened fire on thousands of peaceful protesters at Tiananmen Square in Beijing.
China is a nation at war with itself. As a result, the world is a much different place tonight.
While exact figures vary, some estimates suggest the death toll reached as high as 2,600. This excessively violent reaction to peaceful demonstrations captured the world's attention and completely overshadowed other events that occurred around that period. Just the night before, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who led the Islamic Revolution and shaped the country's politics for years, passed away. But this went largely under the radar.
Every year, the anniversary of his death brings together hundreds of thousands of mourners of all ages.
Other events that were overshadowed by the massacre include the deadly Ufa train disaster in the Soviet Union and Poland's first partially free elections. Number 13, first inauguration of Dwight D. Eisenhower, overshadowed by Lucy Ricardo and Lucille Ball giving birth. If you're watching this video, chances are you probably weren't alive when the classic sitcom I Love Lucy aired back in the 1950s. To illustrate its immense popularity, the famous episode in which Lucy gives birth to little Ricky was watched by around 44 million viewers, accounting for nearly 74% of all U.S. homes with TVs.
Now, let's see. Is there any more information I need?
She's gonna have a baby.
Yes, I sensed that.
This episode, titled Lucy Goes to the Hospital, aired on January 19, 1953, and was made to coincide with Lucille Ball's actual delivery of her son, Desi Arnaz Jr. The remarkable blend of television and reality totally upstaged the inauguration of Dwight D. Eisenhower for his first term, which took place the following day and attracted only 29 million viewers.
I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States.
Number 12. Attack on Clark Field, overshadowed by attack on Pearl Harbor. December 7, 1941, will forever live on in infamy. That day, Japanese planes launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii.
After just 90 minutes, the U.S. Navy's proudest warships sat smoldering and sinking. Hundreds of aircraft shredded.
This assault claimed over 2,400 lives and left more than 1,000 others injured, while also causing significant damage to military vessels and planes. The shock and devastation of Pearl Harbor was so overwhelming that many do not know that another attack occurred the following day at Clark Field, a U.S. military base in the Philippines. The casualties in this attack were comparatively lower, with 80 killed and 150 wounded, and it got buried under the unfolding chaos of Pearl Harbor.
Troops of the 14th Corps bring up artillery to attack the Clark Field area, which is subjected to heavy shelling before tanks and infantrymen move in.
Surprisingly, no official investigation into the Clark Field attack was ever launched. Number 11. The Texas City Disaster, overshadowed by Jackie Robinson's Major League debut. The Texas City disaster of April 16, 1947, remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in American history.
April 16th, still remembered in Texas City as a day of unimaginable tragedy.
A French-registered vessel called the SS Grand Camp, which was carrying over 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, detonated unexpectedly, killing at least 581 people and leaving more than 5,000 injured.
A blast so powerful that it was heard 200 miles away in Louisiana.
Yet, the magnitude of this disaster was largely overshadowed and underreported due to the historic Major League Baseball debut of Jackie Robinson the day before.
The Dodgers owner, Branch Rickey, who took the risk of hiring the first black player, warned Robinson he would be held to the highest standards imaginable.
Robinson's breakthrough as the first African-American player in the modern major leagues dominated headlines and sparked widespread debates in the public. All of this fervor surrounding Robinson breaking the color barrier tragically relegated the Texas City disaster to the background.
In Texas City today, there are memorials to a time that lingers in memory. The 3,000-pound anchor of the ship Grand Camp serves as a daily reminder.
Number 10. The War on Waste, overshadowed by 9/11 terrorist attacks. On September 10, 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld held a press conference announcing that the U.S. Defense Department had been unable to trace $2.3 trillion.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. We cannot share information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of different technological systems that are inaccessible or incompatible.
Rumsfeld came down on Pentagon bureaucracy, stating that wasted funds could be a matter of life and death. But this crackdown on misspending was stopped dead in its tracks the very next day. Tragically, 2 hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center on the morning of September 11th, while a third was flown into the Pentagon and a fourth crashed into a Pennsylvania field.
We saw a lot of things that day that no one should see.
Compared to the thousands of deaths on 9/11, the missing $2.3 trillion suddenly seemed like an inconsequential loss. The war on waste ultimately took a backseat to the war on terror, which cost an estimated $5 trillion. Number 9. The death of Groucho Marx, overshadowed by the death of Elvis Presley. The world lost a comedic legend on August 19, 1977, when Groucho Marx died at age 86.
If any man should come between a husband and his bride, we find out which one she prefers by letting her decide. If she prefers the other man, the husband steps outside. We stand him up against the wall and pop goes the weasel.
His death was somewhat overlooked by the media, however, as Elvis Presley had died from a heart attack 3 days earlier.
Cause of death has been ascribed to hypertensive heart disease and coronary artery heart disease as a contributory factor.
Elvis was only 42 years old, and arguably the biggest solo musical artist in the world, and his death triggered a massive outpouring of emotion from fans worldwide. While Elvis had never really left the limelight, Marx had become an elder statesman of comedy and vaudeville, and as such hadn't really been in the spotlight for nearly a decade. While both men left behind rich legacies, media attention tended to latch on to the younger, charismatic, and revolutionary figure that was Elvis Presley. Number 8. Beirut terror attacks, overshadowed by Paris terror attacks. When ISIS bombed a local refugee camp on November 12, 2015, Beirut, Lebanon suffered its most severe terrorist attack since the Lebanese Civil War.
This man said he was praying when the blast blew a door right over his head.
With 43 total casualties, this tragedy likely would have been all over the news and social media if it weren't for another act of terror committed one day later. On November 13th, ISIS bombed Saint-Denis, a northern suburb in Paris, France, leaving 130 people dead and hundreds more injured.
The Islamic State group later claimed responsibility in revenge for French airstrikes in Syria.
Given the higher death toll, the Paris attacks caused many people to forget about the Beirut attacks. Nevertheless, there's no denying these were two incredibly dark days for humanity that mustn't be ignored. Number 7. The Rwandan Genocide, overshadowed by the death of Kurt Cobain. In 1994, Rwanda experienced one of the most horrific atrocities of the 20th century. The Rwandan Genocide saw the mass killings of hundreds of thousands of Tutsi ethnic minority members and moderate Hutus by armed Hutu militias.
A campaign of violence spread from the capital Kigali throughout the country, which will not stop for 3 months.
Despite its rapid and brutal spread throughout the country, the genocide received scant attention in the United States. It commenced on April 7, 1994, the day before singer Kurt Cobain was found dead at his home, having taken his own life.
Outside the Cobain home, shocked fans held on to one another and reflected on the loss of a man and his music.
Media coverage was largely dominated by Cobain's death, eclipsing the ongoing tragedy in Rwanda. As the genocide unfolded over a span of 3 months, it remained overshadowed in international media by Nelson Mandela's election and later the O.J. Simpson murder case. Number 6. Harriet Quimby's flight, overshadowed by the sinking of the Titanic. In addition to being the first woman in the United States to attain a pilot's license, Harriet Quimby was also the first female aviator to fly across the English Channel.
Well, she was a modern woman in a not-so-modern age. At a time when her contemporaries were wearing petticoats and corsets, Harriet Quimby, as you see, was climbing into a cockpit decked out in her satin flying suit and waving energetically to the crowd.
Taking off in Dover, England on April 16, 1912, she reached her destination in 59 minutes, landing on a beach in northern France. But where Quimby successfully completed her voyage, the same couldn't be said for the RMS Titanic. After hitting an iceberg, this passenger liner sank in the North Atlantic Ocean on April 15, 1912, claiming over 1,500 lives. Overshadowed by this disaster, Quimby never got her moment in the sun and died in an aviation accident a couple of months later, leaving many to consider her an unsung hero.
Harriet Quimby blazed a trail and followed it with passion and conviction.
Number 5. The death of Mother Teresa, overshadowed by the death of Princess Diana. Mother Teresa and Diana, Princess of Wales, had a great deal in common.
Diana was the Queen of Hearts, Mother Teresa was the Queen of the Poor.
Both were known for their charity work, helping to raise awareness of leprosy and HIV/AIDS. Princess Diana notably visited Mother Teresa at a New York convent in June of 1997. On August 31st, just a couple of months after their meeting, the 36-year-old Lady Di died following a car crash in Paris.
The French capital's emergency services immediately announced Mr. Elfayed and the driver had died, but it took them 2 hours to cut the princess out of the twisted wreckage.
Less than a week after her untimely death, Teresa passed away due to heart failure on September 5th. But with the public already coping with the sudden loss of Diana, Teresa's death didn't receive nearly as much media attention. Nonetheless, these two women are still remembered for their dedication and compassion, ultimately making the world a better place. Number 4. Man rowing across an ocean, overshadowed by man walking on the moon. John Fairfax became the first man to row solo across an entire ocean, with the journey taking 180 days.
I'm obviously very pleased. I think what I have done was not easy, and it took just about everything I could give to do it.
Starting his adventure at the Canary Islands, Fairfax crossed the Atlantic and arrived in Florida on June 19, 1969. Unfortunately, this just so happened to be the day before Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to land on the moon.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Armstrong's one small step for man might have eclipsed John Fairfax's crossing, but his incredible feat didn't go completely unrecognized. The Apollo 11 crew themselves sent Fairfax a congratulatory message stating, quote, "As fellow explorers, we salute you on this great occasion," but few others took notice. Number 3. The death of Farrah Fawcett, overshadowed by the death of Michael Jackson.
A final farewell to Farrah Fawcett, a private ceremony in Los Angeles, and a tribute to the star who was the face of the 70s.
Following a battle with cancer, Farrah Fawcett died on June 25, 2009. Although Fawcett's deteriorating health was among the most widely discussed topics in the news, she ultimately had to share the spotlight with Michael Jackson, who was pronounced dead the same day.
Very, very sad news, Jim Moret, and to all of our viewers. Both the Los Angeles Times and CBS News are both now reporting that Michael Jackson has died.
While Fawcett was still heavily mourned, the King of Pop's passing dominated popular culture. MJ's death was front-page news, but Fawcett's was relegated to back pages and entertainment sections. Worse still was the Oscars In Memoriam segment the following year, which featured Jackson but saw Fawcett controversially excluded. Number 2. 1994 NBA Finals, overshadowed by O.J. Simpson's car chase. The idea of a Major League final getting overshadowed might seem unthinkable, but that's exactly what happened during the telecast of the 1994 NBA Finals.
The Los Angeles Police Department right now is actively searching for Mr. Simpson.
On June 13, 1994, O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and friend Ron Goldman were discovered murdered in Los Angeles, and O.J. quickly became the prime suspect. Simpson was to turn himself into police custody on Friday, June 17th, but instead fled in his white Ford Bronco, triggering the now infamous low-speed chase. With CNN, ABC, and CBS covering the live events, NBC followed suit, interrupting Game 5 between the Houston Rockets and the New York Knicks. While the game was still aired via split screen, the juice breaking loose was clearly the bigger story.
It's a very serious situation here, and I can tell you one that is hard to believe with my own eyes.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1. The Capture of Rome, overshadowed by Operation Overlord.
To say that there's a lot riding on D-Day, Operation Overlord, is a massive understatement.
Even if you never paid attention in history class, you're familiar with Operation Overlord, aka D-Day. Taking place on June 6, 1944, this operation commenced the invasion of Normandy, with Allied forces storming French shores. D-Day, however, occurred only a couple of days after American troops seized Rome on June 4th.
The Allied Fifth Army entered the Eternal City from the south, acclaimed by cheering multitudes.
Unlike the Normandy invasion, however, this mission wasn't entirely successful in the long run, as it resulted in German forces escaping due to a miscalculation that later resulted in Allied casualties. The Normandy landings, meanwhile, remain the largest beach invasion ever, with that day proving to be a major turning point in the course of the Second World War. What other events in history were completely overshadowed by something bigger? Let us know in the comments below.
I want to get out there and celebrate the music that Kurt gave us in his lifetime, his life as a human being, and not necessarily a moron.